Um, Mark 16:9 through 20. Is it true that it wasn't in the earliest manuscript? So basically, we shouldn't really be teaching it. Well, I look at it this way. It is true that Mark 16, if you look in most Bibles, you might even find some, depending upon if the Bible has commentary, you might also see notation. You don't see it as often as you would in some King James Version and New King James Version, but a lot of King James Version and New King James Versions, especially if there's commentary, you're going to see some sort of notation that it wasn't in the earliest copies or manuscripts. As a matter of fact, let me pull up a couple of some of these early ones, and so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. When you look at Mark 16, the ending is kind of different. So let's do this. Let's pull these. Oh, let me put it on the screen first. Okay, hold on. Let me scroll back up. Wait a minute. Come on, Corey. Let's scroll back up and let's go to. All right, so let's put it on the screen. It's going to look a little odd for you guys because things are just moved over. Let me just move this over so you guys can see the actual text, and you'll see what I mean in just a second. Let's get rid of the Greek. We don't need. Well, yes, we do. Yes, we do. We do need the Greek. We absolutely do need the Greek over here. So let's pull this up right here, and you'll see why this looks weird. Why you see some of these other versions here. I'll tell you what these versions are in just a second. As a matter of fact, I gotta make them bigger, and you'll see why in just a second. So let me fix this on the fly, and it's not even all that necessary that you guys even need to know what these. Well, you do need to know what they are. You don't necessarily know what they're saying. You'll see what I mean, even if you can't even quite make out what's being stated. So let's do this. Let's move the NASB over, if you all can read that. So here's the NASB, and I know it's kind of written a little bit weird, and I probably should just pull this up on Logos. But anyway, let's read this. Do not be amazed. You are looking. This is Mark 16. This is what verse? This is verse 6. Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He has risen. He is not here. Behold, here is the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples, Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Verse 8. They went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's the ending of the majority of the manuscripts. There's some issues that show up here. Let me move this Greek over, that particular text over. This is just the Greek New Testament, irrespective of which particular manuscript. Now, what you're going to see here is, and this is the one that has what's called the critical apparatus, the one that I'm highlighting right now. And you'll see certain things here. No, I'm sorry, wrong one. That's not the one I wanted. That is not the one I wanted. Give me a second. It's not the one I wanted. Let me take that out, and then let me go and grab the one that has there it is. Let me put that up here. Okay, there it is. Let me make this a little bit bigger so I want you guys to see what I'm looking at. All right. So this right here, this is the one that has what's called the critical apparatus. There is no such thing as two manuscripts being exactly the same. Every manuscript, every papyri, what have you, every codex, every fragment, when you start comparing them to others, you are inevitably going to see something a little bit different. I shouldn't say for every fragment, because some fragments look like other fragments, because there's not enough of the fragment that's being displayed. But if you look at this manuscript versus this manuscript, this codex with that codex, you might see a little bit of difference. For example, you might see the word order change, or you might see he, the pronoun he, in one manuscript, whereas in another manuscript, you might see the name of the person, like Jesus. You might see the word the Lord, or you might see Jesus, or you might see Christ Jesus, or you might see Jesus Christ. And so they're not all translated the same. Remember, in the Bible is what was God breathed, the original, from Paul, from Peter, from James, from John. What is not God-breathed, what is not inspired, were the scribes that came back and copied it. We don't have the originals. We don't have any extant or surviving copies. What we do have are copies of what someone else wrote down. So someone may have written or made a copy in the 1st or 2nd or 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th century. Oftentimes these copies come off of another copy. And so obviously the closer we get to the scene of the crime, so to speak, the better it gets. But there are some that are closer to the scene of the crime that are not good copies compared to some that are a few hundred years after, depending upon what they were copied from. For example, if I've got 2 copies, one is a good copy, one is filled with mistakes, because who knows what the scribe was thinking that day, and maybe he meant to throw it away, it was thrown away, but someone discovered what was thrown away and thought that, hey, I found a manuscript. And so how do we judge whether it was meant to be thrown away or this is how he copied it? And so let's say that one that was meant to be thrown away is a bad copy. And then someone else comes along beside that and copies that. So now you've got a line of bad copies that are making their way out there. Are you with me? It's almost like someone taking the Passion translation, which is a bad translation, but someone taking that and then making copies of that. Well, all you're doing is just making copies of a bad copy, right? Versus this other copy that someone made. It's a good copy, but then someone 300 years after the fact copies that. And so it's a later version than the other copy of the bad copy. Well, which one is better? Depends upon which line, which family of copies it comes from. I hope I'm not losing you guys. So when we look at some of these texts, we've got to figure out, is this a good copy or not? You're going to have what's called copyist or scribal errors. The person, Joe Bob, who was sitting there copying, he might have made a mistake. The problem is, if he made a mistake, how do we know it's a mistake? How do we know he meant to do that? We just don't know sometimes. Sometimes we find burned copies of a text. Sometimes we find a copy that was meant to be trashed or buried, but it was unearthed. So we're not sure. So what we do is we take and catalog all of these copies and look and see. And you know what? Just because there's a spelling change or word order change doesn't change a whole lot. Doesn't mean too much. So it's okay. We can actually get to the original text. That's what you call the art of textual criticism. And there's higher criticism and lower criticism. We won't talk about that. But what we're looking at here, putting this back on the screen, as we look at the text here, notice what we see. At the very end of verse 8, we have an ending. It says in the English, "for they were afraid." The weird thing, in Greek, it says, though, aphobanton, which gar. The problem is with this gar, it's not a bad thing. It's just an odd way of writing Greek. Usually you don't end with a gar, for. Even though word order in Greek is not necessarily the most important thing, but sometimes it is. It just seems as though it might be a bit of an odd ending. So here is the belief. The belief is that it ended here, or there are some that believe that maybe this was on a scroll or something, and the other part of it got cut off. However, we have found codices that have another ledger or line or column, and the rest of Mark after 8 is not written there. So we really don't know what happens. Most think that that's where it ended. Most textual critics, most grammarians, most scholars in this field believe that's where Mark wanted to leave off. Not so much of a cliffhanger, but leaving it off there, even though you don't see Greek written all that much like that. Now, what I wanted to show you, though, was this. I want to bring in Codex Vaticanus and the Byzantine text, Codex Bezae, and then also Alexandria. Let me just get rid of these. Let's get rid of this here. Oh, I'm sorry. By the way, there was something else before I go. When you see these little lines and these little marks here, these tell you that other manuscripts might have other parts written. Okay, now this little bracket here that you see right here, this bracket here shows that all of this from 9 through 20 is not in the earliest, but there are some manuscripts that do have it. There are some that do have it, and then this right here, I won't go into how you use the critical apparatus, but it can kind of tell us. If you look below me, you see all this little Greek writings and numbers and symbols. It tells you which manuscripts might have that particular rendering in it. Now, before I go even further, If we want to talk about the longer ending of Mark 16, which longer ending of Mark 16? There are different endings of Mark 16. There are some that don't go all the way to 20. There is another that goes further than verse 20. It's just this one here that has more attestation. The issue is a lot of folks don't really believe, a lot of grammarians don't believe that particular one is authentic. So what I want to do is let me go ahead and move this out of the way, and I want to show you these three, and I want to show you something as we move. Let me move this over and make these kind of equal, and I want to show you something. All of this is verse 8. This is Mark chapter 16, verse 8. And I hear you guys coming. I'll bring you all on in just a little bit. Now, you don't have to worry about what they're saying. All you know is you see some scribbles, some Greek on your screen, right? Here is going into Mark chapter 16, verse 9. Now, as you see, Codex Alexandria has verse 9. Codex Bezae does. But Codex Vaticanus, which is earlier than those, doesn't have it. Okay? Now, let's scroll a little bit further, and then we're going to see something else that's interesting. Let's go to verse, I forget where this ends at. Here we are in verse, what verse was this? At verse in Codex Bezae, after 15, look what happens. It ends. Of course, it's already ended in Vaticanus. In Alexandria, in Codex Alexandria, or Alexandrinicus, that word always twists my tongue up. It continues. It goes all the way through. So which one is it? Well, in the end, we'll just say, not totally sure. The vast majority of scholars will say that it does end in verse 8 and move forward by some scribe who later on wanted to, either because he thought it belonged or wanted to kind of use it as kind of a commentary. We don't know. We don't know. Amen.